Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for my delay. I was just connecting to the other meeting for Tuesday's lecture because there were some people connected there. So I would like to inform you that you should look at the Moodle page. There is basically 3 links that you should see at the top of the Moodle page. Well, I will show you here. Just one thing, today I will not be on video because I think my laptop freezes when I have my video on. Okay, so let me start recording our session also. Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. So I will share my screen with my Moodle page. Yeah, you should be seeing it right now. So from Tuesday to today, I added the 3 different links. So the way that these meetings were organized or created, we have to connect in different meetings every day. So for Tuesday, you must follow this link up here, Thursday this one, and then tomorrow you will have a lab session, and then you need to connect on this other link. Just one thing, tomorrow I'm not the lecturer for the lab. Mohammed Iqbal is going to be the lecturer for that session. And today we will have a continuation of what we had last Tuesday. Okay. Some of you sent me an email or message asking suggestions about the assignments I proposed last Tuesday. As I said, this class assignments are not graded. It's more for you to get used of using and these technologies. I have added here. Is someone going to ask any question? Okay. I would ask everyone to be mute when in this on the meeting, so I don't hear the noise in the background. Anyway, I will just mute everyone here except me. Okay, sorry. Okay, so this is the Moodle page I have added under the HTML and CSS class exercise. I released today the solution to that exercise. Today, the first part of this session, this lecture, I will explain a little bit about the solution. I will say in advance that there is not a single solution for this assignment. There are different ways of solving it with the same outcome. So if you have a different solution that has the same outcome, it is also correct. Maybe what I pointed out to one of the students is that when you have a less complex HTML is better. So if with simple tags and simple elements, you can get the same end result, it's better than using more complex one. Just a second, I'm having there are some questions here. What specifically do we need to look at on Moodle? Okay, yeah, I think Freddie is asking about Moodle. I'm already showing to you, so you don't need to look at yours. you can look at mine, but you will need to download this solution for today. Sean. Okay, well, if someone missed the class on Tuesday, you can see the recording for all the lectures that we have. I'm recording the sessions, and after we finish the lecture, the recording is made available automatically on the chat. But what I'm doing also, I'm downloading that recording and I am uploading at Microsoft Stream, and I'm including or adding a link on the Moodle page for the recording. Okay, you will see that other lectures, the recording goes directly to Microsoft Stream. I don't know why. I'm in contact with IT also. I don't know why. In my case, the recording goes to the chat, and I have to download and then upload into my Stream. Okay, but after I finish the lecture, I do this activity, and I will continue doing this for the whole semester. Okay. The labs be created. Yeah. So the labs. There is a question also about the labs. The labs are not graded. The only two graded assessments are the two ones that I will post in this session of the Moodle page. The continuous assessment that is due to week 8, and on the next or week after, I will be posting the description of this continuous assessment. And then on week 12, you have the final project that you will need to submit and also make a presentation about your project. But all the labs and all the class exercises are just for you to get used to learn, especially for this web technology. Listening for 2 hours for a lecture, it gives you some guidance of the main aspects of these technologies, but you will really understand and be able to implement something if you put your hands on. Okay, so only hands-on activities that will allow you to get proficient in those technologies. You will have all this material and our support for you to get better in this in using web technologies, but the hands-on is what makes it stick into your brain. Okay, so let's start. So last lecture, on our last lecture, I proposed this exercise. So the idea was to reproduce this content as a web page. Okay, I will just resize things here. And I will show you the solution. As I said, this is not the only solution. There are multiple solutions to that, but this is one way of dealing. So you would need to have your doc type HTML, as many of you pointed out, even in the chat. You can have just the XML, or you can even specify the language that the content will have. Then you have a head element in which you specify some meta elements. For example, I may specify the character set used in this web page is UTF-8. I can give a title for the web page, and the most important part, I can link this to a CSS file in order to provide some styling instructions to the web page. Okay. Well, then here's where it starts. Every HTML have a head and have also a body. On HTML5, there is more elements inside the body other than previously we had. So here I try to use some of them. So we have the header. You could have used H1, but I wanted to explore a different approach. So I used header because this will be the header of my web page, and the content, as I asked, was a link to the Moodle page with the content as a web application development. I got some of you sent me emails with the solution for this, and what I identify is that some people used the open tag and then used also the open tag here at the end. Actually, you need to remember that every open tag has a closing tag, and the closing tag, it requires the slash. So it's the less than slash p greater than. This is what makes the closing tag for any element in the HTML. Okay. Then, well, you have the header. Then I included a main session. Some of you are used to use Bootstrap or some other framework, and then you use div container, div, and then the class container. But well, here it's very simple web page, and I would use just the main. I see that there is one question here. It's Alex, please. Alex, do you have a question? You can unmute your microphone if you want. Okay. Okay, no problem. Okay, it was just a mistake, probably. Okay, so here we have the main elements that will contain the main part of our website. And then I split it using section. Okay, section is a new element in HTML5. And under the section, I created a header, and then under the header, there is the UL element, is an ordered list of elements that I have, and then the LI for each one of the list elements that I have. Again, I used, in order to make things bold, I use B. There is also the strong, but if you, there are some people that use span with a specific class that they would associate with a specific style in the style sheet. For this specific exercise, this was not required because it's very simple. Okay, well, that's basically it. And here you see that I have the OL for the ordered list and my table, in which I use the head and the body of the table, and the cells in the head and the cells in the body. Okay, so this is the structure of the content. So the HTML has the content, and how do I kind of put some style or style this? Using CSS. Then in the CSS, since I use header with the content for the web application development, I stylized the header with the font size, font family here. One thing that I saw is that many people were replicating for the body content of the HTML, the font family and the font size. Okay, so there were some people that included these two elements inside the TD, inside the table, but since this 11 pt is the default size and the font family Arial is the default, what you can do, you can say that this is applicable to the body. So you should try to apply the standards or the most common standards to the body. And then when it comes to the specific elements that you want to stylize, then you make the change. For instance, for the headers, for these aims, learning outcomes, and topics, since I will just switch back to the HTML. So I have here section, under section, I have H1. For all of them, I have the same structure. So I create 3 different sections in my HTML page. And what I did, I just changed the style for this section and the H1 that follows immediately after the section. Okay. After that, well, this already defines the whole this whole part. Then it comes just for the styling of the table. I ask you to put a border on the bottom of each one of the rows. So the border bottom one TX and solid, and the TD and TX with the padding of 5px. Okay, so that is one solution. As I said, there were people that use instead of using section here, just use H1 immediately. That's okay. Instead of using header, it used H1 and here H2. That's also okay. There is no right solution except if it gives the same response. So, okay. Is there any question about this class exercise? Okay. Just check the chat. Oh, okay. So Alex is sorry, I haven't seen your message previously. When you say Alex is asking, what does the selection tag do? Okay, and there is another one. Just a second. Let me open the file again here. What do you mean the selection tag, Alex? Line 14. Here? On the HTML? Oh, it's section. It's not selection. It's sections. Yeah. So you probably saw it. Do you think it's better to increase the size? Okay, I may increase a little bit the size here so you can see better. Sorry for that. Yeah. So this is the section. So there was also a question, why did I use section instead of div? Well, it was a preference because I would like to make it as divided in different, like I was creating a document, and this document has different sections, and I would like to create as a section instead of a div. That's the main purpose. So this new, and I wanted to show you also these new elements that came in the HTML5, which is not actually new. It's new for the HTML5. People usually use div for many applications, especially because it is the oldest form of splitting your document. Okay, but section is more applied when you are thinking as a document. And since here we can think this as 3 different sections of a document or a slide, 3 different slides. So I created as a section, but it does not prevent you to use div instead. Okay, I think, does it answer your question, Shane?
These tags are meaningful tags for the HTML5, which will help for the screen readers. That's why it's using the section, header, footer, or something instead of divs. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And then also Fred Marinas is asking, I set my padding into the table in my CSS and got the same outcome. Yeah, well, the CSS can be included as an element inside the HTML, or if I understood correctly, or in the CSS file. But it can also, oh, I think I understood. He added in the table instead of adding into the padding, into the cells, specific cells. If it's the same padding for everything, that's okay. It depends on the hierarchy. You need to remember that these documents are hierarchical, and the list of elements are hierarchical. So these main element is the parent of section. So everything that you apply for main and you don't change for section will be automatically applied for section. If you applied for table here, and everything that goes under table in the hierarchy, like the T head, TR, TH, will get the same style, okay? So everything will be applied. So that's why you get the same result. But if you wanted different paddings on different cells, then you would need to be more specific. Okay.
Sorry, just a question. Are we able to use div and section together?
Yeah, in the same document, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes, you can use this, both of them. Yes, no problem. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, all of those elements can be used together in all the HTML documents. There is also a question here about the section and then the greater than H1. I think this one here. Here, what it means is that all the elements H1 that is a child of section will get this. Let's say that I include another header here. Let me include H1 here. Then these changes will not be applied to that specific element because it does not come after the section. It's not a child of the section. So the greater than is a child-parent relationship. Okay. Just 1 second here. I'm reading some of the other questions. Yeah, the way you structured the document using the tags like H, H1, H2, or section is, well, there may be some preferences or some conventions, de facto standards, but there is no strict policy or rules for that, okay? Maybe the application that you are implementing, you would like to create in a certain format. I didn't understood. James is asking, can you use a greater than on other code? I don't understand. What do you mean by other code? If you can clarify. Okay, I may come back to this later. Okay, so this is, again, this is just a review of HTML and CSS. This is not to be a lecture on this two technologies. This is just to kind of incentivize you guys to go back and put hands-on and try to understand how to create those documents. But our main topic for today will be XML. We already started the XML last week, and we will continue today. So I will continue sharing my screen, but now in a presenter mode. As I pointed out earlier, in a presenter mode, I cannot see when you send a chat. So please unmute your microphone, or if you send a chat message, I will be able to see only at the end of the, when I stop sharing or presenting, okay? So XML is one of the web technologies. It stands for Extended Markup Language. It's much like HTML, but more general. It is intended to carry data, and it's designed by W3C, and the last specification was updated in 2008. As I mentioned last week, last Tuesday, the XML does not do anything. It does provide a way for you to structure, store, and transfer this information between different applications. This is a simple example of a XML document. So the XML always have a open tag and a closing tag, and they are structured in a hierarchical way, in a tree way, as we will see later on in this presentation today. Okay. So the XML is it defines a set of rules for encoding documents. The rules is every open tag has a closing tag. Uppercase and lowercase letters are different, are not the same. So these rules will be shown later on this slide. But the main purpose of the XML is that the format is readable just for humans and also for machines. So both of them can read and interpret this kind of documents. Well, at least make it easier for humans and machines to read and interpret those documents. As I said, this is a kind of old specification. It has not evolved since 2008, which means that it's 12 years old, the last specification, but it is still very useful and valid. Nowadays, there is another type of specification or data structuring format that is used called JSON. We will see it later on in this module, but let's concentrate now on XML and the different technologies that is related to it. So XML, the main purpose of using XML is to exchange data over the network among different applications. As I mentioned last Tuesday, there are several applications that provide their interaction interface in XML format. And one example I provided is the Irish the timetable for trains in an XML format. XML is text-based, portable, CPU and operating system independent. So, and it does not require any special tool for the manipulation of the files, for creating files. Of course, there are some special tools for interpreting or for processing XML documents that we will see later on today. So why to learn XML? Well, it displays the same data in multiple formats. So the information is tailored to fit the needs of the reader. So moving the processing load from the web server to the client, meaning that if I have an XML file that needs to be processed, I can send that file to the client side of the web application, and the client may process that data in a standard using a standard format. There are many APIs that provide the information through this XML format, and there is the advantages of the presenting and being readable by humans. Okay. The main benefit is that XML is a standard. Imagine that if you have two applications that need to communicate one with the other, they need to specify, let's say that they need to communicate one with the other, and then the two programmers, one from each company, for instance, need to come together and say, okay, this is the standard, how we are going to structure our data, okay? And well, if it's just two nodes, it's okay, but if you think on the internet, and there are even people that you don't know we don't know in advance how your data, with whom your data will be shared, there is no way of doing this predefined structure in advance. So the XML provides a general standard that can be used for this purpose. So everybody knows the minimum rules stipulated by the XML. What we will see next lecture, but what you just need to provide is the meaning or the tags that can be used and the meanings of those tags for the user of the data that you are providing. Okay, so it makes a more plausible and feasible, easier way to exchange data among different applications. And you may surprise or not, but the Word document is actually a zip containing, a compressed file containing a lot of XML files. So I will show here, I will unzip one document I created just to show you that. Just a second, I will stop this one. Okay, so here is my Windows Explorer. If we open this document, there is a simple set of text. If we click with the right button and then extract or unzip this content, you will see that that actually creates different files and directories. This is all XML file, as you can see by the extension. If you come to the Word and if we open the document.xml, well, it is in a single line, but if we move, there is a lot of special tags that are defined by Word, but in the end, all this, I will go to the end because there is a chunk of text. So you can see here that this part of, oops, sorry. You can see here that one of the items in the list, which is many, sorry again, many application programming interfaces have been developed for software developers. You can see that all the text is structured in an XML file. So it's an easy way of structuring content. Okay, that was just to provide you an example of how you can use XML. It's used for storing data. Just a second for me to go back to. Oh. Okay, so what are the uses for XML? One is to store data. As I just showed you, the docx file actually is a compressed file containing a lot of XML files, which carries on all the different styles that you specify in Word, but also brings and carries also the content of the file. As we will see, the XML is very generic, and you can specify your tags, and that's what Word did, Microsoft did when they specified the docx. They specify a lot of different tags for their own proprietary doc file. And there is also the open document format, which is also structured as an XML. You can also use XML to store content for a website. This will be relevant for the continuous assessment one, in which you will need to present XML content in an HTML file. We will learn how to do this, and you will need to implement an application or a web application using this technique. Distributed computing for sharing information among different computers instead of creating a binary format that needs to be shared among everyone in advance. You can create an XML file structure for sharing data. E-commerce and all major databases can read and create XML files nowadays, and mobile platforms also use a variety of XML content. So why the extensible in the markup language? Okay, it's because in the case of the XML, different than the HTML, we have control over how to structure our XML files. We will learn on the next on our next lecture how to create a schema that restricts or constrains the tags or the elements that can be added into an XML file. The data can be marked up in any way we choose, so we can specify it. And it's an agreed standard format to perform common tasks. So you can develop applications that can process these standard XML files more easily than if you had only a proprietary format. Okay. There are some differences between HTML and XML. As I said, the XML, you can understand XML as a subset or a specialization of an XML document. The HTML has a purpose also. It's for content display. There is the CSS, which is for style formatting, and the XML is for data exchange, the main purpose. Okay. So the XML is then designed for specific application or purpose, while the XML is more general, and it does not specify in advance the tags and the meanings of those tags. The basic structure of an XML document is this one that you are seeing on the right side. So it's a tree structure. So you have, as you have in the HTML, an element, and then you have the child of that element, and then another child, siblings. Here we will structure in the same way. You always have a root element, which is the first element that shows up here. Please forget about this XML version here, which is a pre-processing element for the moment, but this is the root element, and under the root elements, you will have all the other elements in your XML file. Okay, these elements are called also tags, and these elements can have attributes, the same way that you had in an HTML document. You will have also here attributes, and these attributes can also have any name or any label. Okay. There is one restriction. You must have just a single root element. So you cannot have products, close the products, and then have another root element. You can make a parallel with the HTML because you can have only one HTML element into a HTML document. So you cannot have HTML, close the HTML tag, and then go on. And there are some basic rules. We will see more details later, but the basic ones are this here. So all elements must have a matching start and end tags, like all the products must have a product closing tag. Here the vendor will have a vendor tag, the product here, and this goes on. Here we are not seeing all the elements, they are collapsed. That's why we are not seeing them, but that's how it works. Our attributes must be in quotes, as in HTML, and all elements must be nested properly. Meaning that if you open one element or one tag inside another, it must close before the closing of the parent. Meaning that if I have the vendor here and I have vendor name, the vendor name closing tag must shows up before the vendor closing tag, the same way it's showing here. This is the closing tag. This is the closing tag for the vendor. So the vendor name closing tag must come earlier or inside the vendor. Well, there are some why we are using these elements in a hierarchical way, because it's a very good way of structuring content. You can think that in a similar way when you are implementing object-oriented programs, when you have an object and inside that object you have attributes, and maybe one of the attributes on that object is another object that has attributes, and this goes on and on in a hierarchical way. Okay. So the XML also groups information in hierarchy, and we have some namings for this kind of relationships among the elements in XML. We always have a root element, which is on the top of my tree. Then this is the parent of all the other elements, is the root element. But we also have what is called the parent-child relationship. So we have here the root element, and the one just below is a child. So the root element is also a parent element, and this one here is a child element. Okay, this is in a tree format. If we are looking in a more textual format, in an XML format, an XML file, we would see something similar that what we have here on the left. We have the name, and then the name and the first. So the name is the parent of first, and the first is the child of name. Okay. See that I don't have the closing tags in these examples, but it's just to show the structure, how it flows into a structure. It's not actually a file. So, and the first, middle, and last, they are all siblings with one another. So they are siblings, and the first is parent of John, and John is a child of first. Okay, that is how this data is related to. This is an actual example of an XML document. We have the catalog as the root element, the CD, and then a bunch of child elements for the specification of the CD. Okay. You can see here that we are using all uppercase tag names, and we will see later on that the uppercase or lowercase makes a difference in the case of XML. Okay, so if I had catalog with a lowercase g, it is different than this catalog with all uppercase letters. And you see that we can use the XML to structure data. In this case, is a catalog of CDs and with different sets of information. Is there any question up to now? Okay.
Is the XML case sensitive?
Yes. Yeah, that's what I mentioned about the uppercase and lowercase. So it's case sensitive. Yes. So I will, just a second. I will close here. Let's say we want to create a XML for products, and we have a catalog of products, and these products they have an ID, they have a name, and they have a description. Okay, and I may have on this catalog more than one product. How do I start an XML file? I would start, for example, if it's a list of products, I can call it just products, okay? And remember that every time you open, you need to close. So one of the things I do usually, every time I create a tag, I already create the closing tag because it prevents me from forgetting. Another thing that is a good practice is to indent your file. So it is easier for you to see that something is being closed or when it's being closed in your file. So we have products. Then let's say we want to specify one product. I can call it a product. Okay. This is the product will have an ID. And I will have also name. I'm not very creative, so bear with me on this. And then description. Okay, so this is one document, is XML document that has a root element, which is product, and it does have one element inside, which is the product. And inside we have the ID, name, and description. But this, as I mentioned, this catalog has more than one product. What I can do, I can replicate. Instead of typing everything again, I will just include another product, ID, product 2, second product. Okay. Oops, sorry. And this, you can go on and on and on repeating this process. But see that everything also can be transformed in an attribute. And there is also different ways in which I can structure an XML document, the same way HTML document is structured. I could put product and define the ID as an attribute rather than as an element inside my product. Okay. This is another way I can structure my document. I have the habit of saving the document here. Let's see, there's some questions. Okay. Okay. So this is a product structure that I can create. I could make everything as attributes, but some things do not make sense to make as attributes. So the way you structure your file, it depends on how you see it's more useful or not. Okay. Is there any question by now?
Yeah. Does each I don't know how to put this, like within, say you have product 1 and product 2, do they both have to have name and description in both, or can one be missing? Like, can one have name
Yep.
and then the next one be missing description? If that makes sense.
No, okay, I see. Yeah, it does. Yeah, that is the force of habit, of my habit of creating a same structure for all the elements, but it's not necessary. You can even have items here. You just need to remember that it needs to have a open and close. And here is a number instead of.
Yeah, that answers my question. Thanks.
Okay. So the structure of an XML file is open. It's not bind to anything. The next lecture, we will learn about the schema. That the schema will impose some constraints that will maybe prevent you to do what I just did right now. But an XML file just don't have this constraint. The only constraint is that you need to have a closing tag for open tag. All the attributes must be in between quotes, the content of the attributes, and that's it. And the element, so you cannot have something like this. So the description tag cannot close after the product tag is closed. This is also not well formatted document. Okay, we will see that this is XML. It's very open, very general. It allows you to do whatever you want. It does not need to store information in this structured way. I showed this way because it's easier to relate to database, but it's not mandatory. Okay. Okay, let me see. There is some questions about iframe. I don't understand exactly if it's about XML. I suppose it's about the video and HTML, but like here. Yeah, you can create any names for any tags. Yeah. Okay. No more questions relevant, looks like. If you have any questions, please just ask now, and otherwise I will continue, I think. Okay, so the way we show like very well structured XML is just because it's easier for you to see it as a repository of information. But it does have different uses. XML is just a standard that allows you to structure data, any data, the way you want. You just need to follow those simple rules. Of course, then you have other XML technology languages that will impose some constraints on different XML files and also force you to follow a specific structure. But XML by itself don't. Well, here is just, so once we understand XML, the XML as HTML, it also has a style sheet. So it allows you to combine XML with HTML and CSS in order to create an output, a web page with a content in a style format. I will skip this quite quickly because what I want to do is we will have an exercise on this later on. So the same way, the main parts that I would like you to understand about this is that the same way that the HTML has a cascading style sheet, the CSS file, the XML has also one language called extensible style sheet language transformation, which stands for XSLT, that allows you to create or specify some forms of transformation of content from one format into another. We will see more about this XSLT later next week, okay, on Thursday next week. But today is just for you to understand that the XML can be processed by what is called the XSLT parser, and this XSLT parser uses a specification to perform the activities or the operations on this XML, which is specified in this language. So basically, when you want to process an XML, you provide the XML document, you provide the XML transformation specification, and then there is an engine, the parser, who performs the operation on and combine those two things. I will just skip this parser part quite quickly right now because we will see it next week on Thursday, probably in more depth how this XSLT works. But basically what it does, it allows you to combine the content from an XML document with a style sheet, or which here is a CSS file, but also there is this transformation file that can be combined using a XML parser in order to generate or render a new document in a new format. And this new format can be in an XML, or it can be a text file or any other text formatted document that you would like to have. Okay, so these specifications, when you are providing constraints, remember that I mentioned that the XML by itself, it does not impose any restrictions to the tags that you are going to use and how you rearrange the tags inside your document, okay? But there is different ways in which you can impose those constraints or those restrictions. There is basically two different formats. The first one is the DTD, or document type format, which allows you to perform this, impose this constraint or impose some structure to your XML document. The other one is the one that this DTD is an old format. It's kind of getting in, it's not being used anymore. So the standard that is being used nowadays is called the schema, and is specified using it as XSD document. So the schema document allows you to do the same thing. It allows you to structure or to impose a structure to an XML document that you would like to create. Like, for example, you could define a certain vocabulary. So let's say that inside your XML document, you don't want to allow people to use items like I did in the example I just showed you. I just want to allow the people to use products, and then product, ID, name, and description. I can create a DTD or a schema that imposes that restriction. And if someone tries to create an XML document that contains other elements other than the ones defined on this vocabulary in this document type element document, then the parser, remember that we are processing this XML with through a parser. The parser will recognize and will generate an error, will indicate that there is an element that should not be there. We will see also that there's a way for you to impose order. So, for example, let's say that we have the first, middle, and last tags. We allow this 3 different tags, but we want them to appear in the XML document in a certain order. The first must be first, middle, second, and last at the end. So we can also impose that. Again, here I'm just describing it to you, but we are not going to see it today. We will see it later on the XML technologies. Basically, the technologies that we are going to see on this module are those here. So today we are looking at the XML. So it's the basis specification upon which the XML family is built. So you can understand XML as a technology, but it also is a specification. You can see even on Moodle that I called this section in which I put the XML PowerPoint as XML technologies, because it contemplates different technologies. XML is what we are going to see and we are looking at. DTD and XML schemas is what we will see next week, and it provides a template or imposed constraints on the XML document. Namespaces that allows you to combine or import vocabularies defined in different documents. XPath that describes a querying language for navigating on your XML document. These documents that I'm showing is very short, but you can have an XML document with millions of lines. How can I find an element or filter element on that XML document? Is through the use of XPath. Then we have also the XSL, which is the language that allows us to process XML document and transform it in another format of document. We will see this the XML, XPath, and XSL in the next 3 lectures. And then there is also XLink and XPointer that allows us to link different XML documents together. But let's just start with the XML file structure. Here is the basic structure for an XML document, okay? We have an XML declaration. Remember that I asked you to forget about the first line of one of the examples I showed. But here it's important to see that this line is a pre-processing line that provides information to the parser about the version of the XML, the encoding of the content in this XML, and also if it's a standalone or not, okay? The second line is the same way you use doc type for specifying that the document is going to be HTML, okay? The doc type HTML already imposes a certain structure to that document because it already recognizes that document as HTML, and the HTML specification already defines the tags that can be used in there. But in XML, as I said, you can use whatever you want. So in order to impose some restriction, you need to define a document type or a schema, and you need to link that schema or document type into the XML. And this line does exactly that, okay? So it's a doc type declaration. After these 2 declarations, then we can start with our root element, which is the airlock system. And then we have a hierarchy of elements with attributes, and inside the tag, we have the element contents. In this case, is the Brunson, okay? And here we have a second element, which is a nested element. And the attributes, and as I I mentioned, all the attributes must come in between quotes, double quotes or single quotes. I prefer double quotes, and actually, even if it's a numeric value, like 200 for height, 300 for width, it must come as a text. Everything in XML is a text. So when you are interpreting XML documents, if something is a numeric, you would need to transform that into a numeric for dealing with that content. Okay, and that is the basic structure of our document. For XML declaration, we have here the different parts. So the version of the XML, we usually use the version 1.0. Very rarely you will see a different version. The encoding that we use, it can be UTF, but also ISO 8859. There is other encoding types that you can use, and also the standalone that defines the document. It contains external entities, such as the document type definitions or some other thing. As we can see,
can you have a break?
Can I just finish the heading part, and when we start the elements in about 2 or 3 slides, then we have 5 minutes break. Okay. Okay. So then we have the XML declaration is not a mandatory element in your XML. You can very well leave without it, but it is a good practice to include it. At least the version of the XML document. In the XML document declaration, the first piece of information in the document, so you cannot have space, comments, anything before. So the first line you must have use it. And the version, as I said, the most appropriate version to include is 1.0 for most of the cases. Well, the doc type. The doc type is where you link your document, your XML document, with the specification of the structure that you want to impose into that XML document. Okay. We will see more about this document type definition in the next lecture, but there's also a different way in which you can relate, in which you can impose this restriction, which is to use a schema. And when you are going to use a schema, you are not going to use this doc type tag. You will use a different declaration. It's similar to a link style sheet that you use in the HTML document. Okay, so before we continue then, because now I will go through all the other elements of a XML document, let's have a 5 minutes break, and then we continue.
Take 10 minutes, because the college usually gives us 10 whenever we're in classes.
What, sorry?
Can we take 10 minutes, because the college usually gives us 10 minutes whenever we were in classes in person?
Oh, okay, 10 minutes is fine. So at let me see here. Now is 2:04, 2:14. We come back. We will have many things to see yet. And if any one of you have any questions that I didn't answer previously, if you want to ask now, I will be connected here, and then I can answer when we come back. Okay, so it's 2:14, so let's get back because we still have a lot of content to cover today. I think once you understand the main purpose of these of the XML document and the main structure, everything else becomes easier. Next week, when we start to see different other technologies, then it's going to start to be a little more tricky. But today, this is more straightforward than even than HTML. Okay, so as I said, we start our document with these pre-processing elements. Then we have the document type declaration. After that, you need to specify the root element, and you must have only a single root element per XML document, and all of them, and as any other tag, it must have a start and an end, a start and a closing tag. Okay, so in the case of the document we saw, airlock system, open tag, closing tag. Everything that an XML element contains is inside this root element. Then we have the different elements that will be structured in a hierarchical way, as we just saw. And here are the one example of element. The type is the starting tag. Slash type is the closing tag. Just like in the XML, in the HTML, in which you have the open tag and closing tag, the XML is the same. You must have the starting tag and closing tag, and in between is the actual content of this element. So in this case, is a set of character that defines the type of, well, type because the name of the type, the name of the tag is type, but it can mean whatever in your application. Okay. Okay. This is very simple. So there is some restrictions with respect to the formatting of an element tag. So the tag must start with a letter or an underscore character. You cannot start it with a number. End tag must contain the same name as the starting tag, and they are case sensitive, as I already mentioned previously. Names in this tag should not contain columns and must not contain spaces. Remember that if you add a space and you enter a new set of characters, that second element inside the tag will be assumed as an attribute, and an attribute has a very specific format. Is the attribute name equals and then the attribute element. And a non-empty element must have an opening tag and a closing tag also, meaning that even if this Bronson text didn't exist, let's say we have the open type tag, we must have a closing tag. Okay. An empty element has no content, and there's two formats for that. The first one is the one I just mentioned, is the open tag and the closing tag just immediately after. An equivalent format syntax is this one that you can see in the return date and then the slash. Okay, so this element is an empty element that is the same as the return date that is defined just above. The element tag must be nested correctly. As I mentioned, if you open italic before bold, you must close bold before italic. This is a wrong format in this example. Okay, the correct way of closing tags for the italic and bold open tags is first close the bold and later close the italic tag. These elements can contain other elements, as we have saw. because in order to form a hierarchy. And the XML is also case sensitive. Okay. So yeah, this is wrong. This is the pretty print. Oh, okay. The way how the XML is structured inside a text file, it does not actually matter. So the spaces in between tags are disregarded. As you remember, I showed you the XML file for the Word document. That XML file didn't have any space. In a single line of code, of XML code, it had the whole content of the XML document. Of course, for you to visualize and for a human to read is much easier to structure as a in a hierarchy with the indentations and all those things that makes our life easier when we are interpreting this. But imagine that you are transferring this file from one computer into another, okay? All these spaces actually consume space in memory, in disk, in memory. Why? Because the computer needs to represent that there is a space, there is two spaces, let's say here, or there is a tab character in this region here. So it needs to store that information. So to store, it will consume memory. So usually for human visualization, we see this way, but when we are transforming or when we are using for machine readability, in order to make it more smaller, we remove all the spaces in between the tags from the end of the airlock system into the beginning of airlock, for instance. And that, yeah, and that's it. That's just to remind you that even though we don't see the spaces in the sense that it's transparent for humans, for a machine they exist and they consume memory. They consume a space in memory. Okay, yeah, easier to humans to read. Well, as I said, every element has those restrictions that are imposed on them for well-formatted XML documents, and every element can have one or multiple attributes. Okay, these attributes is a name-value pair. So after the name of the element, you will have the name of the attribute equals, and then the content of that attribute. Every content of the attributes must come in between double quotes, and they are interpreted as characters. Okay. Well, remember that I mentioned that in addition to integrate the document type, DTD types, we can also associate our XML document with XSLT, which is the language that performs a transformation of the content of an XML file. In order to perform this association between the XML file and the XSLT, we need to add a processing instruction, which is this XML style sheet. Okay, and all the processing instructions, and this is an example of a processing instruction. There may be more than one. For example, we had the XML instruction at the beginning, the declaration that this is an XML file. It also had less than the interrogation mark, and then here XML space version. That also was a processing instruction. These processing instructions are used by the parser in order to define something. In the case of the XML version, is to define the version of the XML specification to use to interpret the XML. In this respect here for the XML style sheet, actually what it is doing, I'm saying which is the XSLT file that should be used to define the structure of my document. Okay, So the browser is the one that reads this and interprets this and performs some processing. Each processing instruction has its own meaning, and depending on the parser, in the case of a browser or any other processor, XML parser, they may have different ways of handling this instruction. Okay. In this case, this is the style sheet integration. So I'm combining two elements. All the pre-processing instruction begins with the less than and interrogation mark and ends with the interrogation mark and greater than. Okay. Okay, so the rest, so just to, after the interrogation mark in the opening part of the instructions, you always have this XML name or what is the instruction that you want to process or the processing instruction. And after the processing instructions, you may have some attributes, and those attributes are also a pair value combination. So you have the name of the attribute equals and the value. And these attributes, in the same way as the processing instructions, are defined by the parser, XML parser. This is also defined by the parser, which are the attributes allowed and which are the contents allowed. We will not see many of those examples because we are going to use only the XML, the processing instruction XML, and also the processing instruction XML style sheet, as we see below here. But there are other parsers that requires or allows other types of processing instructions. Okay, so XML is also a language. Okay, as almost all languages, it also has an element or a tag that allows us to add comments inside. Okay, so in the case of the XML, we have, this is the format for the for comments. So less than, exclamation mark, dash dash, space, and then the content, dash dash, and then greater than. This is the same as in the HTML. So the content is ignored, and it's useful just to add some information about the content of the XML, but it's completely ignored by the processor, the parser. So every XML document that follows the rules that we specified, they are said to be well formatted. And these well formatted documents can be checked, or your XML documents can be checked to see if they are well formatted. Here, W3C provides you with a link for that. I did not include, but what I will do after our lecture is to include a link on the Moodle page that allows you to test your XML, to check if it's a valid XML or not. Okay, and when it's well formed, it's just that follows these basic rules that we just saw. It does not impose any restriction regarding the structure of the XML, as we will see next week. So these are a summary of the rules for XML documents. So I will just skip that one. So the rules of a well-formatted XML, we have seen, this is just also a summary. There's one thing I did not mention, which is these special characters. So in the case of XML, less than or greater than are special characters, and they do not appear, and also the ampersand are special characters. Okay, so what I would like you to do right now, very quickly, I will give you 10 minutes, is please try to create your own XML file with your timetable with this structure here. Okay, so we will have 10 minutes. So now it's 2:29. At 2:40, I come back, and then I will show an example of a timetable that I already posted also on Moodle. But yeah, try to create your own and see if you have any questions, any doubts of how to begin an XML document and how to structure it using these fields here. Okay, so we don't have much time, so I think we already got the 10 minutes. Let's see how to structure a document. So you can do it also later on. And tomorrow you will have a lab. So during the lab, you will also be able to practice more this kind of activities. But basically, when you are creating an XML document, remember that we can, if we want to start adding the XML specification, we should have it as the first element in our document here. So we would include, instead, and then 1.0, and we can add the first element or the processing instruction of our document must be the XML with version. This is optional, but it's good to include there. After that, we could include other processing instructions, but I want to structure the information about the courses of my program in NCI. So if I want to do that, I could already include just courses, but let's say I would like to make it as a program. Because I want to include all the courses from my program. My program is, I can say the name of my program, BSHCIFSC, for instance, and then I can start the courses. You see that I don't need to follow the same standard. Of course, to be nice, it would be good if my tags are all lowercase. I should try to create all of them as lowercase, but that's not mandatory. This is just the way I want to do it. So my program is the Bachelor of Science in Computing, and I would like to list my courses. So just remember that I have my opening and closing tag, and I want to include all my courses. My courses, it does have, it will specify the year or module and some other thing, but let's say I will put the course, and as I always said, it's a good practice to enter the course has a specific year, and one course has always also many different modules. So inside the modules, then I can insert each one of the modules. Remember that, as I said, we don't need to have the names, even though I create modules and module in the plural and singular inside. It's not mandatory. It's just a way to make our life easier. Okay. Yeah. Well, then the name, well, let's say that we do have a name, web application development, name, but let's say we still don't have the time of this web application. So what we can do is just simply create an empty element. And well, I can structure this in different levels. I chose to start from my program, but you could choose to start from my course. Just remember that if you have, you must have just a single root element. Okay, so if we look at our Moodle page, there is an example of the products file that I created earlier, but also for a timetable for the school. this could be a structure of an XML with a timetable for your modules. Okay, just highlighting how it is. Is there any question for now about how to structure a document? Yeah, there's a timetable sample here. The name of I don't understand what Sean is asking if the name of the Notepad document is important as well. What do you mean by Notepad? Oh, the name of the file, the extension. If it is the extension, it's a standard to use .xml for all the XML file document content. Well, files with XML content, okay? So you will use .xml as an extension. I will release all the other examples on Moodle, but you already have 2 examples of XML files on Moodle that you can download and take a look at. Yep. Yeah, the timetable has a little bit different structure than what is required in these assignments, but it's pretty much the same content. Is there any question, any other question by now? I think I answered all the questions. Okay, so the last part. So up to now, what we saw that XML is a very flexible language that allows us to structure the content in different ways, and their main purpose is for structuring content and for storing that content for users in different applications, using it as a XML, as an API, or use it for communicating different applications, or even to store content of a document like the Microsoft Word does for us. But now, and we have seen all the different elements that may compose XML documents. There is another entity in the XML called namespace. A namespace defines a collection of elements and attribute names. It remembers that a XML may have a vocabulary, so the namespace is kind of a vocabulary. It defines a vocabulary that is associated to a name, basically. Okay? The namespaces serve for two purposes. The first is to distinguish between elements from different vocabularies with different meanings, but the same label. Let's say that you are going to create an XML file that will use 2 vocabularies, one vocabulary for math and one vocabulary for word processing. But in those 2 vocabularies, let's say that they have the same tag, the same label for the tag. If you use that tag in your document, how would you differentiate between the tag that is from the math vocabulary from the math that is from the word processing vocabulary? The way you do this, you add an element, and this element is called a namespace. Okay, we will see in the next slides an example showing how this is possible, and it will be more clear when you see what I'm talking about, other than trying to imagine what namespaces mean. So basically here we have a prefix, which is my namespace, and then I have a local part, which is the name of this element in the vocabulary. And when we add them up, we are actually creating a qualified name, which is composed of a namespace and then the name of the tag or the local part. Okay. Each prefix is mapped to a URI in the following way, meaning that this part of the qualified name is created in the header of our XML document. We will see how to do that. And it uses this XML NS, which means XML and namespace. Then prefix. By prefix, you can add any name you would like, which is the namespace name. And then in front, you would specify the URL where that XML vocabulary is defined. And an example here is that we have the XML namespace, and we create namespace product, and we associate this namespace with this URI, which is pointing to the mycompany.com/product. Okay. We will learn how to use it later on. Then the default URI for a whole document is specified using only the XML NS equals and then the URI. Generally, all the elements from one XML application are assigned to one URL. If you don't specify the namespace for an element, the default URI or default namespace is used for that specific element. And the namespace can be declared in the elements where they are used or in the XML root elements. We will see up here. Let's say that we have this root element, the XSL style sheet, and then we can specify which is the XML NS. And then we are specifying the namespace called XSL that will be valid for our whole document. Okay. I will go to the examples. I think it will be easier. So this is the element. This is the alias that we want to create, and this is the namespace. Okay. So suppose we have an XML document containing some HTML source code, such as this one. So we have this snippet, which has the tag table, TRTD. Well, if you look at this as a HTML, you see that this is a table, but you can look at this same content as an XML document, because it's well formatted. It has a beginning of start tag, closing tag. You have for all of them, you have the same format. Everything starts with a character, and the tags starts with a character. Everything is well formatted here. Okay. Let's say we have another XML document that has this same tags: table, type, material, price, and the closing tag. It is also an XML document that is structured in well-formed structure. Okay. Let's say that we would like to combine. So here we have this table, which means a table in HTML perspective. This other table element means a different table. It means a physical table that is a coffee table made of plastic that costs this much of money. Okay, so we have two elements that have the same tag, a name, and at this moment they reside into different XML documents. Okay, let's say that we want to merge them into a single one. What we can do, we can add a namespace to them. So in the case of the HTML, we add a prefix, which is the namespace prefix called HTM, column, and then table. For all the HTML elements that we have on that file, we add the HTML in front. So if we do this for the other one, for the other file, instead of HTM, we use a prefix called furn, of furniture, because that is a furniture table here means a furniture. Okay, and why do we add this prefix? is exactly for avoiding any conflict if we want to merge these two contents into a single file. Okay? Let's say that we have them merged here. How do I specify this that HTML is associated with a vocabulary from the HTML, and the form is associated to a vocabulary in the furniture space? I need to add this attribute into my table element. So everything that is inside my HTML table will have the meaning of this vocabulary TR, TD, and TR and TD will come from what is published in this location here. Okay, this does not need to be accessible. It's just to make it differentiated from other vocabulary. So here we have a vocabulary for HTML. Here we have another vocabulary being defined for the form. And so the table here the table here should be interpreted as a furniture table, and the table here should be interpreted as an HTML element. Okay, so if we don't, but if I need to create another HTML table, I would need also to specify again this whole thing for each one of the tables. One way to avoid it is to make the following. In my root element, I define the two namespaces. So I have the HTML namespace declared, and I have also my furniture namespace declared. So inside my XML, I can use that prefix, the HTML or form, in order to specify the prefix for any of these namespaces. Okay. Yeah, here is just here is just to show. So in here, we did not specify the prefix or namespace for the default namespace. But let's say that if we want to have a default namespace, like we have here, we have the example.com airlock as our default prefix. So XML NS equals, and then there is no prefix. So the XML parser will interpret this as my default namespace, and I declare another namespace called LS, okay, the live support. When I don't specify any prefix in my tag, this means that the parser is associating to this vocabulary this tag. But if I want to use some of the vocabulary terms that is defined by the live support, then I need to specify it here. Okay, so it's a way to have a default, and then for specific purposes, I can apply a specific namespace to that tag. Okay. Is that okay? Does anyone have any question? At the end here, we have also some self-assessments that you can use for practicing. I will stop sharing here. Let me see. Does anyone have any question at this moment?
Could you go up with two slices? 49. The slide 49.
Okay, yeah, 49.
Do you need a separator or a comma between the?
Here?
Yeah.
Space.
Do you need, or you don't have to put any separator?
Yeah, here, the separation here is just by space. It's just the way it is structured, but it's like space. It's not a comma.
I don't have to put any comma or something, no?
Oh no comma.
All right, that's good.
Yeah, no comma. This is the way. It's a space separated between these two elements here in the root. Is there any other question? Okay, so today what we saw is we concluded the XML from the XML technologies. tomorrow you do have a lab. I don't know exactly what time is your lab, but I will release the lab tutorial that you will need to do tomorrow on the Moodle page. The lecturer, as I said, is Mohammed, and you will also interact with the different lab assistants, I believe. Okay, someone posted this from 2 to 4. So from tomorrow, Mohammed will release the lab on the Moodle page that you already have access, and then you should be receive some guidance for how to proceed in performing the lab. The lab will consist of creating an HTML and a CSS document, and also one part in which you will need to structure a XML document. Okay. Next week, we will start seeing more specific technologies associated to XML, and the first one is the DTD, or in the schema, so the document type and the schema language, and then on Thursday it's going to be XPath, and then later on the XSLT, which is the transformation part of the XML. Is there any other question? I think our lecture has got to an end. So then I thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I thank you everyone for being present. I hope it was helpful, and I see you on next week. I will stop sharing, stop recording right now. Thank you.